Hello and welcome to this episode of Norwegian Data Center TV. Today we are discussing a topic that's on top of everybody's mind. Are we running out of power in Norway? And do we have problems with connecting to the grid in Norway? We're at the Freyens offices. It's a fantastic venue. We hope to be invited again. And to lead us through this discussion, we have invited Pelle Gangeskar, which is the marketing director of Ringerikskraft, to answer all my tricky questions about the power situation and the grid in Norway. So welcome to the show. All right, Pelle, good to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure, Pelle. So before we get started, please tell us about yourself, your title, and what you're working on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, so I work as a marketing director or CMO. Obviously, we need a nice title in Ringerikskraft, only working with data centers. I've been doing that since 2016 in different companies, but with Ringerikskraft only since 2018. So basically, I've been working on developing land and attracting data centers for close to a decade now in Norway. So it's been a journey.
It's been a journey, and that's kind of one of the reasons I've invited you to the show, because what's on top of everybody's mind today is the question of power, the question of the grid. I think that my first question to you would be, are we running out of power? Because that seems to be like a common perception among the man on the street, that we're basically about to run out of power, and that the data centers is basically contributing to this, to drain the power faster than ever before.
To answer the last question first, are the data centers draining power? Obviously, all power-intensive industry is taking power away from a pot. We produce about 150 plus minus terawatt hours per year in Norway, and close to 1% of that is consumed by the data center industry as of now. But if we look into like the realistic plans, I have no vision of we running out of power before I'm a pensioner, at least after 2040. I know that all the analysis have looked into this and have put in this like headlines, we're running out of power next year, 2027 or whenever. But in reality, we see that a lot of the projects that were planned have been folding, moving away due to different reasons that we'll get back to probably later in the talk. Yes. But from a realistic standpoint, it's going to be really hard to see us running out of power anytime soon.
That's really reassuring, and I think that's. I think that if you look into the situation like you're explaining it, it's obvious that we're not going to run out of power on the foreseeable future. But I think that we should just probably jump right into the challenge that many of the operators are talking about today. It's the process on getting this connection to the grid. Would you please just take us through the process in broad terms, from when you submit your application for power until you have power in the outlet?
I'll try to do it short. It's a jungle out there, Bjorn.
It's a jungle out there, but let's break it down in piecemeals.
In Norway, we have 2 to 3 levels of the grid, with the top, the TSO being Statnett, and then you have a regional grid operator, and in some areas, like in Ringerike where I'm from, you also have like a local DSO, so you have 3 grid levels. And in total, there's more than 100 grid companies in Norway, and obviously for an operator coming from abroad, it's going to be hard to figure out who am I going to approach. And it's been cleared up quite nicely over the last few years as the data center industry and other power intensive industries have evolved. So now you go in contact with the local grid, the lowest level grid in the municipality that you want to establish your operations. So it should be quite easy to find the right contact person. And depending on the power that you're going to consume, you might be diverted to the regional grid level or even to the TSO level if you have a direct connection over 100 megawatt.
All right. Okay, so there we are. So I know that many of the operators, or especially the new players that are not familiar with the Norwegian system, they maybe have some false assumptions on or unrealistic assumptions on the timeline. So I think that basically it's time to market. That's the name of the game here. That you want to get the power as soon as possible. But what is the realistic perspective seen from a operator connecting to the grid? Let's say I would like to establish a data center on 100 megawatts. What do you think would be a realistic timeline, and what's implied in the process?
The bad news first.
Yeah, okay.
All the low-hanging fruits are gone.
All right.
Okay, so you'll have to be patient and realistic on your build-out timeline.
Right.
So coming to a grid operator in Norway and say, I want to have 100 megawatts in 12 months, you'll just have to look elsewhere.
Yeah.
You will use more than 12 months to build out your data center campus as well. But in realistic terms, we're looking at 5 years plus to get to that scale. And with the grid operators, grid owners being able to build out in steps, maybe these 5 years plus, that sounds really bad from a seller standpoint. It's not too far from how you can build out your grid and your operations and your data center campus, because it takes time.
Yeah, and this is actually quite interesting topic to talk about, and it's how do you cut this project into pieces that are manageable and that you can grow with. So let's assume I'm happy with 15 megawatts or my 100 megawatts. How fast can I get those 15 megawatts, and what kind of concessions or agreements do I need to agree with the grid company in order to get this?
I think for a 15 megawatt or this kind of scale, there are many places in Norway that are still readily available that can give you this power quite fast. And then due to the different factors that you like for your site, I mean, Norway is a long country. Yeah. It's 2,000 kilometers and 1,200, 1,300 miles south to north. There are different qualities for the different areas. Yeah. And in some places you can get this with a ramp up quite fast. But to get 15 megawatts, you need to be deemed operationally sound by the grid, so that this 15 or 100 megawatts is not interfering with the grid, or even in worst case could turn into a blackout. And then you need to be deemed mature. And to be deemed mature, you have a row of things that you need to be mature on. It's actually 8 criteria. They are readily available on the TSO website, but only in Norwegian. Yeah. One of them is that you need to have exclusivity on the land. You need to have a project that has a timeline and a scale up. So it's quite hard to reach like the highest level of maturity, but that's the only way you can reserve power.
But in my view, it sounds like there are some benefits with the maturity process as well, because you're basically tidying up the queue that maybe has been blocked by other projects that hasn't been so mature. So what's your perspective on that?
I think you're totally right. And the evolution of the grid connection process from when I started this till today has been really good in terms of clearing up all the alternatives, but we still have a little bit of way to go to clear away all the ghost projects or the projects that are not easily funded with today's economic macro perspective. So you're right that we will free up a lot of capacity in Norway once this once the queue, the established queue is cleared up, and it's going to be an exciting few coming months now. We know that the TSO are doing everything they can to publish the queues, so everyone can see who is in line for power. And I am fairly certain that you're going to see a lot of projects being counted twice or 3 times or even more, because everyone is hedging their bets on where can I get power at the first.
Tell me why should I hedge my bet? Why should I place my bet on different locations? Do you think it's I should bet because one of the locations may give me power, the access to the power earlier than another one.
No, you shouldn't hedge your bets, but that's what's going to happen when you don't get a clear response from the grid operator that you asked on the timeline and the scale of the power. Obviously, if you're a data center operator or a hydrogen project or anything that's heavy on the power consumption, you want to come into operation as soon as possible, because that's when you start earning your revenue. So getting power in 2028 versus 2032 is a big difference from your owners and your investors.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that sit in offices like this.
Yeah.
And they say, you need to be operational now.
Yeah.
And then you start running around Norway and you say, okay, I might compromise on the location, on the access to cooling water or access to raw material or whatnot, because I get power earlier. And this is a very suboptimal situation. Yeah. So I just have to say I applaud the TSO's decision to now clear up in these queues, so that we will have more power available to the right customers in the right place.
Sounds, I completely get it. So my follow-up on that would be, how can the industry, the data center industry, support or work together with the TSO and the DSOs to even streamline the process even more?
Well, I think the first thing is to be more honest on how many places you are really gonna deploy. So be a little bit more specific on the location and don't hedge your bets as much as some of the operators, not only in our industry, but in all power intensive industry have done. And make sure that you have a really good connection with the DSO and see what are the local constraints. Yeah. Everyone is talking about the frequency markets, where you have a shift in the frequency from the 50 hertz. That's going to solve itself. We have so many batteries, we have so many infrastructure items that's going to take part in these markets, but the capacity is the real issue. We have cold days in winter where normal household consumption is really high, peaking normally on day 3 of a cold spell. How can the data centers help relieve these constraints? By maybe running gensets, obviously on biodiesel or HVO 100 for a couple of hours in these cold spells, and still deploy earlier. This is a solvable problem once you start communicating between the TSO, the power producers, and the industry players.
And I think that we probably should just disclose the fact now that we are already in the have established working relationship with the Statnett and the DSOs on this topic. So tell us a little bit more on the first workshop we had on this, just to give the listeners the perspective on that.
Yeah, and we had, once again, I must applaud the evolution of the grid companies in Norway. Just last month, we were lucky enough to be here at Føyen's office. Yeah. They have a great facility downstairs, where we had more than 60 operators and grid companies and everyone involved in like the frequency and flexibility and reserve markets. And we got a full day workshop where a lot of new perspectives came out. One of them was that everyone has been talking about frequency response, and we see that the capacity response might be a larger constraint in the short term. Yeah. And obviously, as we addressed a little bit earlier, the timeline from when you as a data center operator wants power and from the TSO, how they normally develop the grid and the substation. Yeah. This timeline we have to close, and we could do it by being more realistic in our needs and maybe be a little bit more ambitious on how we build out and deploy grid.
Exactly, and I think that's my opinion, that the data center operators, they're willing to accept a timeline that's probably longer than they expected from the start, but with a firm commitment that you ever go, or else you will be punished. You will be sanctioned if you as a grid operator don't meet these targets. So I think that, do you agree on that, or what's your perspective?
I agree in principle with you, and I think it will be hard to get like a TSO or a DSO to accept to pay a fine if their projects are delayed, because that's more, up until now it's been like the rule more than the exception.
Exactly.
But obviously to have some kind of first firm power that you can deploy your build out one, and then you have a good dialogue. This is the step up. We go from 15 to 50 to 100,
Yeah.
and the 50 will be in this year at this month, and the 100 will be at this year and this month. How can we achieve that together?
Yeah.
That's like the main reason. And I think what we haven't talked about is, why are the grid operators skeptical to utilize the grid in a, how do you say, harder fashion than what they've done up until now?
Yeah.
And I don't know if everyone knows that, but you get compensated once the power runs out for a period of time.
Okay.
And for you as a household, it could be the tens or hundreds of kroners. But for a power-intensive industry player, it could be in the millions of kroner per day that the grid operator has to pay you because they don't deliver power. And this obviously is something that a grid manager does not sleep well at night thinking about.
No. So, but what if the data center operator enters into agreement, say that forget that punishment.
Mm-hmm.
I want you to increase the utilization of the grid. Mm-hmm. And if it fails, I'm not going to sue you, or I'm not going to charge you for any money.
I think that's one of the one of the tools in the toolbox that we need to utilize better. And the culture journey from being a grid operator that provides power to everyone at every time with belt and suspenders and everything, to do that journey from there to actually challenging the end user. Are you willing to, since you're using so much power, are you willing to assist me in a constraint situation? And the answer would be from the data center operator or the power intensive industry, yes, of course. And are you willing to waive any compensation that I by law am obliged to pay to you if you have an outage? Obviously the data center operator would say, yes, but I need to know some data. Are we talking about 11 hours per year or 1,000 hours per year? And I see that we're moving in the right direction, but maybe not fast enough and maybe not enough together.
How do you see regulations being a constraint or could help us on this? Are there any regulatory hinders or blocks that keeps us from taking the instance, for instance, that you waive all your charges if the power disappears?
I think the major hurdle is just the timeline for the bureaucracy and the paper mill in Norway to develop new projects. That's where the regulatory authorities can really shorten their timeline. We can take 2 years for a concession for a new substation, which should be done in 6 months. And all these paperwork are really delaying and scaling down the potential of what this new industry could mean for Norway. So obviously there are things to be solved, like can we do this waiving of the compensation? Obviously we can, but that's just changing a rule and entering a new rule. But to change the culture on how we develop the grid, how everyone involved from the authority level to the TSO to the operator, how can we together work to increase the speed and take down the risk?
Well, I'm just going back to the workshop we had last week with the TSOs, and in my opening address, I also showed them the headlines from the investigation from the Energy Commission back in 2023, where it said more of everything faster. That means that you should provide more power, you should more grid access, everything, more of that faster. Do you think we have experienced substantial progress since that report was published in 2023?
No. I think that the focus in the general public has been too much on how many megawatts new power can we create, but what we really need is capacity at any and all times. So variable power production is not the cure for this, illness. We need to have capacity at all times. Obviously the variable power could assist, but that's not the backbone of the grid. And in terms of how can we build out faster, I have, except for the grid companies' change of culture and change of pace, I have still to see local authorities, state authorities, or regulatory authorities do anything that substantially shortens the timelines of these build-outs. I'm sorry to give you that answer, but
no, okay, but I'm having a more positive take on that, and it's room for improvement.
it's room for improvement, obviously, but they are at the table.
Yeah,
thanks
and
to Norwegian data center industry and their workshops, we have the people that around the table. So,
yeah, absolutely, and it's the kudos to Statnett for doing this initiative. I would just go back for a little while to the reserved capacity queue in Norway. It's last time I checked, it was about give or take, it was 2,000 megawatts reserved capacity, and then you have also in queue for reservation, and that was 2,500 ish, if I don't recall it totally wrong. And all the reservations, those are matured projects, both in the reserve capacity and the in queue. But you say that some of the projects that are in, did I understand you correctly when you said that some of the projects in the reserve queue are zombie projects that eventually are going or likely to fold? Or do you think everything in that queue will materialize?
I hope I didn't use the word zombie projects.
No,
but
it was my,
that's
my expression.
Obviously, as we addressed earlier, the criteria for getting a place in the queue have changed dramatically. So there are now much higher requirements to be and stay in the queue. But a lot of the projects that are deemed mature, that are in the queue, haven't been through this revision because the reservation was placed a long time ago, before the plague, which, if you can remember the plague back in 2020.
No, I've forgotten now everything about it.
So I am fairly certain that after a revision or two, when the TSO and the DSOs have gone through these reservation queues, you will see that a certain amount, quite a substantial amount of these, do not reach the required maturity, have moved abroad, or have just vanished.
Yeah.
Remember, the price of money was 0 in 2020.
Yeah.
Now the interest rate for projects like this, it's above 10. Yeah. So it's going to be really hard to materialize the projects that have not the best ROI. So just looking at the facts of the world, a lot of these projects aren't ready for market now.
Okay, so but the 2,000 megawatts was for the data centers. And if you go back to the thing we talked about the hedging your bets across multiple locations, do you have a wild guess in when there's going to be more clarity for the operators, for the data center operators, so they can pull back their reservations on the places they really don't need anymore?
I'm hoping that the process that we're going through now will give a lot of clarification within this year. We're in 2025 now, but I don't want to be the one guesstimating or saying that in 2030 we're going to have X megawatts of data centers in Norway. Obviously, last year we had 151 megawatts of deployed power in real data centers in Norway. That number is going to grow substantially. And I like to say that the oil age in Norway started in 1969. For the data center industry, we're equivalent to 1969 or 1970 now. It's going to grow really fast for the coming 5 to 6 years, especially obviously in build out, construction, and so on. But we are in a gold rush, and there's going to be so much businesses to be core and side of the data center industry, but everyone needs to work together. And this is like the opportunity of not our generation, but our kids' generation, Bjorn, sorry to say.
Yeah. So I completely follow you on that, and thank you for bringing up that point. I think that we can never stop talking about the fantastic opportunity we are facing to build a world-class data center industry, and we have already an ecosystem that really shows success in every part. So I'm really happy to see that we are progressing, and let's do everything we can to make this happen. So I think before we round up this conversation, I think we should talk a little bit about adding more power production, because I think that I'm sad to say that I'm not very optimistic. If you look at the development through 2024, the addition of new power and renewable power to the Norwegian grid, that was nothing much to brag about. Do you see anything that would be present in the near present or in the longer time scale in terms of adding new power to the grid? And would it be only renewables?
Well, I think a lot of the discussion in Norway now is about new power that takes up a lot of area. Could be solar parks or wind parks and so on. While our whole economic prosperity that we see around us here is built on the hydro-powered dams and reservoirs. These are built 2 generations ago, before you and I were born, by adding like 0.5 meter to 1 meter to 5 meters on some of the already built-out reservoirs. That could give us terawatt hours of power, really simply, without having like all these untouched, pristine nature conflicts that we talked about. So that is one thing that we could do in addition to more renewable and obviously variable power in a combination with the data center industry is really interesting. But that's probably for another podcast.
I think that's a whole episode.
And we know that a lot of our neighboring countries are really deploying nuclear. Nuclear is in the kind of like starting gates in Norway. Some municipalities have come a long way. Halden in the southeast of Norway is probably leading the pace. So that's going to be an exciting journey to follow. And that would be a game changer. I mean, the Nordics and Norway, we are the ideal location for a data center with the cold climate, with free cooling for so many months of the year, with skilled workforce, with so many of the boxes ticked, and having abundant, clean power from now until the foreseeable future. That's just a fairy tale if we could get to even more of this.
So wrapping up this the conversation, what would be your main takeaways that you would leave to the viewer on this talk?
There's still power. Everyone involved needs to work together to develop the grid faster. And if you're an operator that's still not in Norway, you're welcome to come and talk to Bjorn about it. But Bjorn, that's my opinion. What did you get out of this conversation?
Well, I'm going to share it with the viewers. So I think basically what you said, everything is on a positive note. We have a lot of work to do. There is a lot of work to do, but we have established a good cooperation between the data center operators and grid operators that we obviously need to evolve. There are some regulatory hurdles and some regulatory issues that could potentially be low-hanging fruits that we can harvest that could really shorten this. And also very relieved to understand that we are actually not talking about running out of power, but there's still a need to add more renewable power to the system. So with that, on a very positive note, thank you, Mr. Pelle Gangeskar, for attending me. Hope to talk to you very soon again.
Let's go to the bar. Maybe there.